Good afternoon everyone, welcome back to 5-Minute GCSE. Today we're doing a very important video. We're doing GCSE AQA History Treaty of Versailles. Perhaps the most important part of the course. If not, definitely top 3, top 5. Really important you pay attention here. Let's get right into it. Lots to cover. Now, let's recap here for a second. After 4 years of brutal warfare in Europe, the winners of World War I, as we know, the Entente powers, needed to decide on how a new post-war Europe should look like. And the leaders of the Allies aimed to create a long-lasting peace on the European continent, ensuring that such atrocious conflict never takes place again. Therefore, while Germany was sorting itself out in 1919, the Allies began drafting a peace treaty for the Germans to sign. At the January 1919 Paris Peace Conference, negotiations between those who wanted to punish Germany badly and those who wanted a fair treaty took place to produce a compromise, the Treaty of Versailles. Now, you will need to know more about this and the Paris Peace Conference if you do a complementary course to this, which is the Conflict and Tension course. If you don't, you do not need to know. If you want to know sort of super curricular knowledge, you can read The Economic Consequences of Peace by John Maynard Keynes. Very good book if you want to get just that extra knowledge about the Treaty of Versailles and the Paris Peace Conference. Now, before we go through the specific terms of the treaty, let's quickly look at an overview of it. Now, this is a complex treaty. You do not need to know it clause by clause, but it is useful to have a solid knowledge of the peace treaty as a whole and the effect it had on the German people. That is what will be useful. If you have specific own knowledge you can use, and it can be summed up with a simple acronym TRAP, T-R-A-P. So it is Territory, Reparations, Armed Forces, Pride. Those are basically the 4 key things you need to know. Now, in terms of territorial losses, we have a German postcard from the 20th century that shows you what kind of lands it lost. You don't need to know every single bit of land that it lost, but you should know the main ones. So for example, Alsace-Lorraine, that was really crucial. Germany annexed it from France during the 1870-1871 Franco-Prussian War. So the fact that it was given back to the French was very important. Northern Schleswig was given to Denmark. Meanwhile, Posen, West Prussia and Upper Silesia was given to Poland, with the Polish corridor splitting Germany in half. Now keep in mind as well that Poland did not exist up to this point. It was created right after the Treaty of Versailles. So this really angered quite a lot of Germans. The important port of Danzig was also taken away and made a semi-autonomous so-called Free City of Danzig. Now, the Saarland, although it wasn't officially handed over to France, was basically occupied by the French, and it was a coal-rich industrial region of Germany that it really needed after the war. Germany also lost all of its overseas colonies. Do you remember the Kaiser? He pursued Weltpolitik, increasing his empire overseas, but all of that was gone. Togoland, Cameroon, German East Africa, all of the colonies were gone. Now, the reparations were also pretty big. With all this land loss, Germany was already crippled economically, losing 48% of its iron industry, for example. But this was not all. On top of that, Article 232, and you will not need to remember many of these articles, there are only really 2 you need to know, but this is one of them. Article 232 stated that from 1921, Germans would have to pay the cost of war. And that total payment over the years was set at a staggering sum of 6.6 billion. That is a lot of money. Now, let's take a look at the armed forces. We've got a poster here. Don't know if it's a Nazi poster, but it's definitely a German poster showing how the other countries nearby were allowed much bigger armies than Germany, and it made the patriots and the nationalists really angry. Now, Germany was forced to demilitarize. That's a key term right there. It just means remove all military forces from the Rhineland, which is that area nearby the Rhine, nearby France. Its navy was cut down to 15,000 people as well as 1,500 officers, and its air force was abolished. Conscription was prohibited, so all personnel had to be volunteers, and Germany was also not allowed to hang tanks, use submarines, or participate in the international arms trade. Now, national pride's the last one. It seems like quite a short slide here, but this is really crucial. This is one of the key factors here. Article 231, right, the article before the reparations clause, known as the War Guilt Clause, meant that Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war. This really upset the Germans, and it's no surprise that it's 231 because this clause was used to justify the high reparations cost. The country was also forbidden from uniting with Austria, Anschluss, and this was also a heavy blow. Now that we've looked at the terms, let's take a look at the German reaction to the Treaty of Versailles. We've already discussed a bit of the reaction, but let's go into a bit more depth. So while the peace treaty was signed in late June 1919, 28th of June to be exact, the German public became aware of it back in May. And unsurprisingly, Germans were outraged that they had to sign such a humiliating agreement. Many of them wanted a just peace based on Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And if you do not know who Woodrow Wilson is, that is the 28th President of the United States. He was at the Paris Peace Conference, and he was known to be quite an idealistic man, whereas the French and the British, unsurprisingly, who were really damaged by the Germans, were more vengeful and wanted to punish Germany much more. So therefore, his so-called just peace was not really implemented, and instead ended up being a so-called harsh diktat. That's the word Germans use. That's a key word right there. Germany lost 1/8 of its population with the treaty, and the many ethnic Germans who woke up in new countries, created practically overnight, were very upset. 10% of German land was given away, and that ignored the self-determination of the inhabitants. That's one of the key points of Woodrow Wilson, is that he wanted people living in Europe to be under governments that they wanted to live under. So the Poles were to live under the Polish government, the Czechs were to live under Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states were to be independent from both Russia and Germany. But for Germany, that was not applied, and that made people once again really, really angry. This loss of territory, as well as the Anschluss prohibition and the war guilt clause, angered the German patriots. And the fact that the Weimar government had to sign it weakened their power. It delegitimized them, as radicals used the treaty to attack the government. Now that is it. Let's take a quick look at the key terms here. There are quite a few. Now that is it for the video, guys. If you need to go over it several times, that is perfectly okay, because you will use this throughout your course. I hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice day.